This is Melissa, and today is actually the 26th of April when I'm recording this, but you will be hearing it tomorrow, Sunday, the 27th of April, 2025. And I'm doing a little experiment here. I have a deadline because I am going to go to the Telegram channel and have a discussion about the syllabus material. I had to have a good night's sleep last night, and I woke up and I just decided, okay, first thing is have a piece of toast. And then second thing is go and record something. Don't read any emails, don't look at anything, don't do anything except record, because I felt like I had something on my mind when I woke up that I was processing, and I would just share it with you rather than censor myself by having too long to think about it. The talk that I have chosen to put up for you on this Redux is the first portion of one of the really long talks that Alan did in 2020. This is from November 22, 2020. And the title is Hidden Masters Bring Disasters. And I will read you the poem, which I didn't read in advance, which I sometimes don't do, so excuse any blips in my delivery here, but it's Hidden Masters Bring Disasters. There is a full-scale war upon you, rights stripped without consent, listing what you may or may not do. The accused public must repent and admit guilt for just existing, occupying space, and then assuming it can go on blindly persisting with a life of constant consuming. Hidden masters tried persuasion, created earth armies of the youth, from schools of indoctrination, eat no meat, but have sweet tooth. Hurry, populations unsustainable. It's emergency powers or you'll die. If fixed temperatures unobtainable, you all lose. Freeze or fry. Now stop and look around for clues. Before warming or COVID-19, there's a whiff of old Tom Malthus. So the reasons are not all they seem. In fact, the wicked web is elemental. Hidden masters fund all the forces which say you're surplus, non-essential, and you're eating the owner's resources. Now, I did say that word once in the poem because, as I said, I didn't read it in advance, and there it was. But there are a few, I think I'm going to be playing about the first hour 20 of this talk. But by the time I cut out some offensives, it might be a little bit shorter than that, because the reason why I chose this, I was looking for talks in which Alan discussed psychopathy in particular. And in this talk, he happened to talk about psychopathy and possession. And one of the little search terms or phrases that I put in when I made the topics those years ago was, you are in a spiritual battle. And so I thought that this might be good to go up for several different reasons. Last week when I was listening to the Redux that I put up when Alan was filling in for Jackie, I think that was August 2, 2005. And he said that he was filling in for Jackie Petru because she was suffering battle fatigue. And later on in the talk, he talked about those people that, are speaking out against it. So those people who are in the trenches speaking out about it will sometimes get battle fatigue. And though he was making this a collective symptom of fighting in the, fighting against the powers that be or saying truth, I recognized that he was actually speaking about himself, and that was 2005. And you'll notice that in this talk of November 22, 2020, Alan talks about the condition of the house, the fact that it's a big tool shed with everything in it. And he has mentioned that before in talks, and it's the basement flooded regularly. It was the way that the house was sited on the hill. The couple that built it back in the 60s, they built it themselves, and that's wonderful that they did that. But it suffered from kind of the engineering siting things that might have been taken into better consideration. Anyway, the basement flooded. And so toolboxes and all of that was upstairs, and computer parts and all of that was upstairs. And it really was a crazy house so in terms of the way that we had everything in there working. And anyway, that wasn't the point of why I wanted to tell that story. And the point was that in this talk, Alan discusses how exhausting it is. He doesn't say, I'm a prophet, I'm calling myself a prophet, but he says when you're compelled, when you feel called, when you feel that you must speak out and do something, there's a price. And he said, you don't live a normal life, you can't accept visitors like other people do. That takes a lot of time, it takes a lot out of you. You might want to broaden the walkway between toolboxes so that someone could comfortably sit down. And people who visited us know that I'm not exaggerating. But more seriously, what Alan was saying was, it takes a toll on you. It takes years off your life. And Alan had lived with, some chronic illnesses and conditions since he was a child. And when he did have the, that he needed when he was going on tour with a band and was going to a foreign country and needed to, I'll just use the word amplify, one of his childhood thingies that you get, he came down with rheumatoid arthritis. And his fingers swelled up to about twice the size that they normally were. And he was told by his doctor that he would never play guitar again. And he splinted his fingers, and that did bring the swelling down. And he kept them splinted basically with, tongue depressor, popsicle stick kind of set up there on all of his fingers until the swelling did go down. And he lived with a lot of pain from the late 90s, mid 90s really, into the time that he passed. But what he's telling you that there's a price to pay, and he wouldn't wish it on anyone. And there's a calling, a compulsion. You're compelled to do what you do, perhaps because of what you know. So that was his story, and he's sharing some of that with you. And a few months ago, when I was making a plea out for help with property taxes, and I will plea again right now and say, I would love it if any of you want to purchase the flash drives. They're beautiful. As I mentioned last week, it is a great value. This is essentially, minus the books, this is essentially what Alan considered the important part of his life's work, and it's all there collected for you and beautifully, and it helps me keep going. But when I was making that plea a few months ago, I got a well-intentioned, sincere, and kind email from someone saying, you just, you should just stop. I mean, Alan wouldn't want this for you. You should enjoy your Aunt Betty and enjoy life and take it easy. And I don't know if it was the mood or what, but I got back to him and said, you don't know Alan, and I think he would feel good about my decision, though he wouldn't wish it on me or anyone else. He would certainly understand that I feel compelled to do what I do, and that's it. I do believe that I have a unique perspective, as we all do, really, but I have a unique perspective on Alan. And I feel compelled to share that with you in as many ways as I can. And it does take a lot out of me, and it would for anyone who does this. So, and yet those are kind of the stakes for the time that we're in and what we're living through. I was thinking about the money system, the con of the money system, which is ancient. It isn't just that you have to use money as a form of exchange for the goods and services that you need. That's only part of it. It's not the, middlemen, and it's not the taxes. All of that factors into it. But what is really going on is that it creates an entire system way beyond money, of how we think and live and what we value and what we hold dear. You'll know, those of you who've listened to Alan for a long time, that he said, what the elite don't want you to know is that there are thousands of ways, many thousands of ways that we could go as cultures. They don't want you to know that. They want you to think that this is just, we're bumbling down through time, and this is just how it is, and this is how it unfolded. They don't want you to consider, they do not want you to consider that this is a carefully constructed system all the way across. And because of that, the money creates a mindset so that if you have enough to have a good meal, or, if your clothes are a little bit nicer than your neighbors, or your car is a little bit nicer than your neighbors. In other words, it builds into it, it bakes into the cake a psychopathic mentality in people. And Alan said this, I can't recall at the moment if he said it publicly, but he certainly said to me that they've created a psychopathic culture. And that's not just the psychopaths in charge. It means that there's a trickle-down effect, that we begin to exhibit qualities that are psychopathic, and we treat each other in this way. So what is psychopathy? I had this question. Maybe that's why I woke up with some of these things right at the forefront of my mind. But someone wrote me an email last week, and one of the questions that they asked me was, how do you recognize a psychopath? Now, if they had asked me how you would recognize a narcissist, I think that just based on the way psychologists describe them, textbook definitions, I think that might have been a simpler question to answer, because psychopaths, and this is how I responded, very, very difficult to recognize them, even up close and personal, because they wear masks, and they have worn masks for a long, long time. And they hide behind these masks, and they can, they're interchangeable. If they need a new mask, they study people. How do people respond over any kind of a situation? How do people respond when there's a birthday or a wedding, or when there is a death in the family? And they study that, and then they emulate it. So they're good actors, and it is incredibly difficult to recognize them. But I do think that there are things that make it easier to see what it is you're looking at. And I think that is kind of a key thing that we all need to know how to do. But at the same time, we put it with our own humanity. Because what is missing here in this, dark triad, in these personality types, what is missing is true humanity. And so the more we develop our own true humanity, that's our whole range of emotions. Because you can only know what genuine anger or righteous indignation or a temper tantrum looks like if you've actually experienced that for yourself. If you've seen, oh yeah, I know what that's like to feel that kind of an emotion. Same with joy or sorrow or anything. The more your own human qualities are developed, then hopefully the easier it is to see when you're up close to someone that their human qualities may be a mask. It may be a persona hiding the fact that there's not true humanity behind it. And they're little tells. I mean, Alan would say to me, people usually end up giving it away if you spend enough time with them. If you're close enough to them, you can see they just can't keep the mask up forever, particularly in a really personal or intimate situation. There is a passage, a little paragraph, or maybe it's just a couple of sentences at the end of the first volume of Alan's Cutting Through books, which I have shared before. I guess it's the last paragraph. And I will share it again, but I'll first of all say, so I am going over into the Telegram channel, and we're going to have this first discussion. And I see a lot of, I hear or read, that's it, I read a lot of comments that show me diversity of opinion and thinking, and particularly around religion and especially around Christianity. And there are, within that little book club group, there are materialists and atheists and agnostics and Christians. And I think that there are some followers, there are Islamists, and I don't know the whole range, but it's a wide range. And one of the topics that has come up with some regularity is the spiritual or entities. Are there entities? Is there evil? Are there forces, etc.? And I don't need to really throw in loudly on this conversation in that forum. I know what Alan thought. I know what he said from time to time in talks, and I know what he wrote. And I'll refer to that, but I also know my own experiences and things, experiences that I've had that I can't simply say, oh, well, there's a really great, obvious explanation for this. I might have to consider that there's something else at work that is not explained in the realms of science. And in this talk, Alan discussed actual, hierarchies of entities that, that as a possibility. And when I look at qualities, you'd say my own experiences and interacting with people who I realized were psychopathic or narcissistic, that there are, once you recognize it, once you've got some experience with it, you go, okay, yes, that's definitely what I'm looking at here. And the symptoms of them are pretty carved in stone. It's pretty much, yes, that is what I see. And I that is what I see. And this is interesting to me to think about it in terms of the symptoms of other diseases. My aunt has kidney disease that she's lived with for years. And it doesn't, other than making a few dietary changes here or there, it just is there. And the ways in which it might affect her or, are very slight in terms of actually having a symptom, whereas she has a friend who has kidney disease, and her friend has different kinds of symptoms. Maybe it's more advanced, but she's also been living with it for several years. And what I'm saying is they don't feel exactly the same around a disease that is called the same. They both have been diagnosed with kidney disease, and yet what they complain about is very different. And so in the physical world, I think, physical health, I think we find that a person says, I have such and such, and this is how I feel, and another person will have the same diagnosis and they feel differently. And yet when you study a psychopath, when you really know that that's what you're looking at, and you really know, and again, I'm doing it, this is armchair, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but when I have satisfied myself that that's what I'm looking at, it's just interesting to me that the signs and symptoms are so uniformly present. They are the same. They are uniform. I am legion, it has been said. And it does sometimes look like that's what is present. All right, well, I missed my deadline here because it's time for me to hop over to Telegram, so I will come back and try to finish up quickly my last remaining thoughts, which might not be as clear as they were when I woke up. I said that it is hard to recognize a psychopath, and it is. It's very difficult, but unfortunately, the more that you come across them, the easier it is to recognize them. And unlike other physical illnesses where you get a diagnosis and the symptoms might be very different from case to case, there are a certain set of things that you can look for in a psychopath. And if they have a handful of these and you suffer some kind of an attack from them, or you get in their crosshairs, then the chances are that's what you're dealing with. They can, on the surface, be quite charming and charismatic, but you find that once that charm wears off or you get past it, there might be a mean streak or some cruelty behind it. You will definitely encounter dishonesty, lying, exaggerating, shifting the blame is a big one. They do not take responsibility ever. They are sadists, and Alan mentioned that, I think, in the Redux that I put up last week, that he was talking about how the gods that rule us will eventually turn on each other. He said, in the end, it doesn't work out for them, this needing to eliminate all of us, because they're sadists, and they must have victims to enact their sadism on. They enjoy our pain and suffering. That's the bottom line. And this can be really subtle with people in your social or family orbit, but it's there. The Germans have a good word for it, a good word called, I'll probably slaughter the pronunciation, but Schadenfreude, which is the delight in other people's suffering. They often engage in, thrill-seeking or dangerous behaviors. Not everybody that skydives is a psychopath, but if there's lots of things that they like to do, sexual promiscuity, if these behaviors are mixed with drug and alcohol abuse, again, it's possible that you're looking at a psychopath. The rules don't apply to them. And, that's a tricky one too, because the more you come into your own individuality, the less likely you are to feel constrained by societal norms. So there's that. But it's just something, rule breakers and those who flaunt norms are very often high on the psychopathic scale. They don't care about consequences because they aren't going to take responsibility. They exploit people for their own gain. They're very strategic and planning, a total lack of conscience. Sometimes you can see, particularly in lower level psychopaths, violence, abuse, aggression. But in the ruling elite, those have been typically successfully channeled into ways that are harder to see. But the bottom line is they are masters of deception. And who was a liar and deceiver from the beginning? Just things to think about when we're warned about what we're looking at. Now, narcissists have a different set of qualities in them, but you do start to recognize them. They're grandiose, and it might be you can maybe see that grandiosity. This is a humorous example, but if you tell a friend that you have a headache, they don't listen to that. I mean, the moment that you say, I've got a bit of a headache, is the moment that they say, oh, I woke up with a headache and it was the worst headache. Oh my goodness, it felt like my head was splitting in half. That satisfies both the grandiosity, the biggest headache ever, and the attention-seeking part of them. And they're very controlling. Again, they lack accountability. They lack empathy. They shift the blame. They rewrite history in real time. They're insecure. They're deeply insecure, but they come across often as being arrogant. And a big thing with narcissists is that they can't be team players. They're not team players. When you provide them an opportunity to be a part of a team, they're not interested. You find that you get put down either in ways that are quite transparent or in ways that are subtler. But whatever you do is never good enough. They would always do it better. And eventually, when their mask comes down, they will let you know that. So they're not team players, and they don't emotionally connect with other people. They can emulate, they can imitate what it looks like to be loving and kind, but they don't seem to genuinely feel that. And so I won't get into all of the other categories that we are given psychologically. I just feel that sometimes I ask myself the question, what am I looking at? Alan has posed the question a few times, or thought out loud that maybe what we're looking at here when you look at pure ego is that you're looking at a psychopath. Or maybe what you're looking when you're looking at a psychopath is someone who is perfectly possessed. And maybe you have, in other words, possessed with darker energy. And I do believe that people participate, either born bad or they participate in a dark descent that eventually just makes them not human. You're looking at something that has a human body but has none of the other characteristics of humanity. So like I said, it can be, these people are so good at the masks that it can be difficult to see them. And humans that have a lot of empathy, humans that love, that can feel in, a wide range of emotions and are genuinely concerned about other people, can have a very difficult time accepting what they see, because we always want to give the benefit of the doubt. We always want to say, well, yeah, it looks pretty ugly, but maybe it's childhood trauma. It looks pretty ugly, but there must be something human there. So we do always want to see the world from our own perspective. And if our perspective is to see people as good, even if you fall in a camp that's slightly pessimistic, and you might be on the people are born that way category, you're still going to have the optimism that there is a humanity there, and frankly, it might not be there. So the point that I walked away from there and wanted to come back to was, what did Alan write at the end of the first volume of the Cutting Through books? He wrote, "We are spirits descended into matter for a purpose. Understanding this and fulfilling this is the meaning of the term, having life and having it more abundantly. This does not mean accumulation of products. It means doing that which is true. Truth is eternal. It cannot alter. Only truth will make you free." So, like I said, there has been a lot of conversation about what is truth, what is good, what is evil, what is spirit, what is spirituality, and it's an interesting journey that we are embarking on in the book club. And I think there's this comes up over and over in Alan's talks, and it comes up a lot in this last year of his talks, 2020 into the end of February of 2021, where Alan gives us a lot more clues as to what he thinks and how he sees things. That's my ramblings done, and I wish you a really good week, and you take care. This is the first hour plus of a talk from Alan that was over 4 hours. I didn't check the runtime and completion, but it's over 4 hours, and it's really, really good and worth listening to it all. And if you broke it down, an hour a day for the next 4 days, I'm sure you would learn a lot and get a lot from it. Take care.
I'm Alan Watts, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 22nd of November, 2020. I've said many times that truth is it's not so much elusive. It's not something that squirms out of your way. It takes help to squirm out of your way, and you help it because you don't want to look at it and believe it. And it's rather sad, isn't it? But it's a human trait to have. We live in a form of hope that other people will fix our problems for us. And that's why people too also blame everybody else for their problems. Individuals do it all the time. It's, again, a human trait. And young people are more prone to it. We've all been through there, where it's much easier to blame everything else rather than blame yourself for certain things too. But people who go through their whole lives being managed and liking being managed, this is part of the problem too, become everybody else's problem. I said back in the 90s on a radio show that after I told them the agenda, and at that time people said, "Oh no, that could never," here we all are, it's bingo. But back then people, "Oh no, surely not." They could understand what I was saying, because even then I used the facts and articles and books put out by the players themselves, of the people who really run the world, And because they don't come out, generally, up until now, openly, just say, "Yeah, we run the world, just go back to sleep," Unless you read their books, they hinted at an awful lot. In fact, some of the quotes I've given out too by some of the big players, including Rockefeller himself, where they thank the press and the media for not exposing to the general public what to do in their big meetings, their international meetings and so on. And he actually said that they could never have got this far without the help of the press and not telling the public. So now these aren't conspiracy quotes either. These are factual quotes. You can find them out there yourself. You're run by a system, obviously. Most folk we're all born into it. We don't get a choice now. We're born into it. And I've said before that you have to get early indoctrination. First of all, it starts with your parents, because they had indoctrination to believe the system was all real too. And don't blame them either for how they ended up, because you'll be the same way in a different generation, just as confused perhaps. But they went through wars. Some of the people still have their parents alive today who went through World War II. And then the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War for the States, and for Australia too, by the way, and they used British Special Forces as well in there as well to get them blooded and tested, etc. So it's war after war after war, and since then you've had what they call low-key warfare, where they don't put it out on the book so much to the press, but there's wars on the go all the time, multiple wars, as countries vie for resources, basically. And by countries, I say that the corporate nation state, because it's really a corporation. And everything under that you sign on to, it means that you're working for the corporation, whatever you do, including the military, of course. And when you join the military, you're not a member of the public anymore, you're private, you're a private soldier. You're owned privately by a private company, you see. And technically you give up your rights as a member of the public when you become a private and you're owned for a time of service. You're bonded, you see. So folk don't realise that you go along with, and you give your assent and consent to being ruled by voting. And the trick has always been to create parties. Oh, this is for the working people. That's how it used to be, until most folk don't have any work to go to, you know. But that's how it used to be. So you join that party, you think, well, I'm a working person, so that'll speak for me. And you wouldn't think beyond that, really, until you looked at the West, and Britain especially was awfully prominent in having communist leaders running the Labour Party. And many of them for years and years, you know. And it came out later, of course, just to verify it, it came out later by authors who wrote books on it. And they mentioned that Coke and different ones were members of the Communist Party. And they had Lords in it too, of course, House of Lords, because many members of the Labour Party, they love to get knighted and get up there. They're snobs as well, you see. And most folk can't figure even that out, because they really think you're trained, as I say, to see things just in basic shades of black and white, you know. And in reality, it's beyond all of that. When you think that communism is really an idealistic thing for equality and yada. No, it's nothing like that at all. Communism is a term to be used for technocratic rule. Technocracy, true technocracy, is really a form of managing the socialistic system efficiently. That's what the big boys want to see. And that's where you're going. And people get caught up in ideologies without realizing, wait a minute, don't fall for the ideologies. Don't fall for the excuses for anything. Because that's part of this big game. We're so well it didn't all start in the 20th century that they were understanding human nature. We've been studied for thousands of years by rulers and their advisors, kings and queens and so on. Vast amounts of knowledge on how to manage populations in every possible scenario. You know? And of course, in the 20th century, definitely they had more money, public money, funded into universities and studies in psychology and behaviorism, which then added to the techniques which now apply upon the people. And then with the internet, that's it. Basically, everyone's observed, and you're transparent. As I say, you're the true new clear family. You know, NEW, clear family. You see right through you. And they know all about you. And you help them because you again, you know, if you want to use this program or that, you got to accept their rules, and you sign everything away, you know, firstborn and all. So convenient, isn't it? So back in the 90s, as I say, I mentioned at the end of a long talk on the system and what was coming and how we got to where we were then too. Where after World War II, you had a little bit of a break because you had all that industry built up with taxpayers' money, by the way. The public-private partnership is not a new thing at all. And it went into actually producing things which you need and you could sell. And so from about 1945, ended 45 to 46, and then into maybe 1970, there was a bust of prosperity for working people in the middle classes too. And from 1970s, it started to wane because now you had multiple factories being cloned across the planet producing the same items. And once you go into third world countries, you can't compete with the cost of labor. And that's why eventually your politicians, who are all crooks anyway, and they all belong to fraternities, and they're crooks, and they're all sworn to stand by each other. And they signed off through the GATT Treaty and the free trade negotiations with China to bring them in as the most favoured nation partner. And it still stands today. We paid, our tax money paid companies to uproot their factories and move wholesale to China and to be set up there, to be paid for all. Thank you very much, politician. And people still vote too. And really truly, they did sail through it. Most folk didn't realise what was going on. If you mention to them, everything you buy in the stores now is made in China, and it's like, oh, there's no question about it. There's no inquiry. There's no puzzlement about it. It's just, yeah. And people floated through it. So in that talk, as I say, in the 90s, I said, when I was asked to give the people some cheer, basically, and hope, and I said, look, I'm not here to be a cheerleader for the people. Because that's part of you've had too much cheerleading your whole lives long. And you have to make decisions personally, you see. And stop leaving everything to other people to do for you. That's why you're in the mess you're in. You're always waiting for the one, the movie, oh, you're the one. Here's the hero coming to save you all. You know, stop doing that. Because the world is coming for you, whether you like it or not. At least those that run it. You got to understand this. So I said, no, I won't be a cheerleader for the people. I says, I have two problems in the system. I says, one are the elite who run it all, and they're the dominant minority, as Huxley called them. And then you have the academic and scientific community that implements all, including the psychologists and behaviorists, on us, and social services and the civil servants. They push it on us, you see. So you have one group, the elite and their helpers, and then you have really the general population. And the elite use the general population to go after you in the middle that doesn't want any part of anything, you see. Well, they've accepted all this, no matter what it is. Why aren't you? And they'll turn them on you. It's easy to rile up the public, the mob, You've seen the Frankenstein movies. Easy to get them riled up. Yeah, he's not going along with what we're putting up with, or paying extra taxes, or dit. So yeah, the general public are your problem too. And they always have been. And you can't help, It's not a matter of despising the general public, because you've come from them yourself. And I've often been asked the question, and many people ask each other the questions, ask me the question, and I've asked myself many times too. What is it that makes some people want to know what's really going on? And what's behind it, and a bit of the history of it and so on. What is that thing that drives you to do it? Because you're driven to do it, compared to other people who just don't care. They go along with, they get angry, they'll be emotional and angry when things are cut off, they can't get what they want, or whatever it is happens to be. But they don't really want to know. And I was, back in the late 90s, early 2000, someone offered me $40,000, a big businessman, to give me I call it a drive-through answer. So you're driving through for a donut or a coffee or something. To just sum it up from, you believe what I was saying, but sum it up from in 15 minutes. I says, no, I'm not going to do that for you, I could have done it. or done something like it, or conned the man, but I wouldn't do that. But it shows you that people don't want to take the time to just collect not just data, but understanding information. Big difference. Everyone's been through school. You know what they want at school. And people would cram before examinations. And then they'd forget it, all the stuff they'd learned in the cramming. They'd forget it over the next few months. You know? What's the point of it now? When something is so vital, not just for your whole life, but for future generations, things to know. If you're aware of things that are coming down the pike, through laws and regulations, and organizations can head it off at the pass, so to speak, then you're doing a tremendous job against really dark forces, including the general public. The public are dark. They're dark. They're entertained to death. They can talk endlessly about sports, all the guys, and who did what when, what year, and blah blah, and they'll talk about movies galore. Women love the movies, and they can reel off actors and actresses and their personal, all the gossip stuff. That's what their reality consists of, and everything that really matters frightens them, and so they close themselves off from it, and they'll close you off too. And I used to ponder that, and if you're looking at different religions, you do get examples of the same thing happening in generations, thousands of years ago. Even from Buddha, and even pre. I would say, but I still call them the more recent religions in a sense. But even from Buddha, and Siddhartha, because most of what you get from Buddhism was written by his disciples, his followers, and they wrote, once he died, they wrote about what they'd learned, but some of them wrote commentary of the talks that they'd have, because they didn't get enough. See, people don't get enough from you. Knowledge isn't enough. They want something extra. And I used to say that if you have something, the spark inside of you, that hits you, it might have always been there, just waiting to get turned on. This thing that puts you in a roller coaster of knowledge. And it is a roller coaster, And you can't switch it off once it starts. And it comes on like waves of, and I mentioned too back then that it's like Gestalt, where everything that's around you isn't just you coming into it, it's all there already, and it's also in you, and it comes together inside your mind, if you want to call it your mind. And you understand that aha moment, as the occultists would say, That's what Crowley was referring to, aha, was a term. But long before him, and in many other religions, actually, you find the same kind of thing. It hits you. And it's always been examined by those who get hit by it, because in ancient times, even outside Hebrew faith, because a lot of that whole area was steeped in lore, very old ancient lore. I think partly because of the warmer climates and their ability, of course, to have big rivers, and that's where they count along big rivers for irrigation and crops and so on. Whereas the northern climates had these repeating ice ages over time, and many ice ages too, where it just, even Britain and part of Scotland was covered in ice a few times, and the folk who'd moved back out again. They can tell that the same people kept moving in and out, even by the DNA from bones and things, from the marrow parts of it. But anyway, in the equatorial areas, they were much, much older, of course, and those who were into philosophy or questioning, and started to write about it, gave us a vast knowledge of it. But many things began in religions as they tried to explain what things were. Why are we here? What is this all about? And is there something else beyond all this managing things? I mean, because you can learn, and the news is true, you can learn as much as you try to learn. Learn to fill yourself full of knowledge. But you still have that little thing, occasional hit you, like tap, tap, tap. There's something else beyond all this, you know. Children have a much better understanding because they sense it. And they don't deny it. They don't throw it off as silly. I've mentioned different examples of this natural telepathy, for instance, where your best friends or your family members might start whistling or singing a song at the same line at the same time, things like that, and you laugh about it. You take it for granted. It's normal. Things like that. But getting back to this need to know and the questioning of it, it's always, it comes down to something. There are people who have something and it's alive, and maybe there's people who either don't have it or is dormant and it hasn't been awoken, you see. And it might take a necessary act of will to open that little door, eh? Because I say the followers of Buddha, for instance, Siddhartha, some of them complained. They said during his teaching, they kept asking him to go further into the realm. Don't forget, too, they were in India. In India, ancient subcontinent, ancient peoples. I mean, peoples, plural, and many languages, and many, I mean, millions really of gods. But through all the gods, many of them are aspects of human nature, if you want to call it that too. And so they wanted to try to ascribe certain facets of human nature to a god and use it as an external example, something, a pictorial drawing or something. But so some of the disciples said, we kept asking Siddhartha to go deeper into the spiritual side of things, and he wouldn't do it. So many of the students who were already soaked in the old traditions of reincarnations and so on, added to Buddhism over the next couple of 100 years, 200-300 years. And you have the present form today. They weren't happy just to get the teachings of Siddhartha himself, who left it that way. He told them about life, and he told them about the present life, and many other things I'm sure that went over their heads at the time. Because people who have itching ears, even if you turn over to the Christian version, the term itching ears, people they're desperate to know secrets, right, as opposed to knowing wisdom. And the wisdom how to apply things and use secrets, you see. Most folk are after power. And folk who seek power can never be trusted. We should learn that in our lives. Look around you today, what's happening. Power has been, the hell has been created every generation. We get a chance at hell, you know. And world wars or whatever it happens to be, you know. Power, power, power. And we can say it's such an easy word, power, but we don't want to go into what power is. And power is a very, very dangerous thing. And it has to generally steal its power from you, actually. You must participate in its power to be ruled by it, whoever it happens to be. And the trick for running millions of people and controlling them is, again, as old as the hills, as they say. Keep them in fear. Establish a system that will benefit you. You'll be a ruling class, you might say. And you create divisions of things that the people then need, mainly because you've cut them off from doing it all themselves. Because power must eventually take all necessities for human life into its hands to have that and control power over the people. And it's never been so evident as it is today. And the coming famines, etc. Because it's all a cover for the Great Reset, which is just the whole 100 years of Agenda 21 crammed into 100 years. 19 is being used as an excuse to get you back on track with sustainability, the climate change, depopulation, austerity, sustainability, Millennium Project, which morphed into Agenda for the 21st century, the United Nations Agenda for the 21st century, or simply Agenda 21, where a whole bunch of new changes for living and lifestyles will be ran through, and have been so far, but you've got a bunch of years to go yet. But they plan to literally reduce the population into a post-industrial, post-consumerist society, and step by step by step. That's only part of it, of course. You can read it for yourself, but that's what's being used for, using emergency war powers. And they've been rather blatant about it at the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome and all the other big institutions that work with them, CFR, Trilateral Commission, etc. That's where you have to go very quickly, actually. The whole global warming agenda, sustainability, it's all the same thing that they couldn't ram through quickly enough. And they've simply gone into phase 2 and global reset. It's permanent, folks. Unless you do something about it. And Clint Eastwood isn't riding in a pony to do all for you. And no politician's going to get in that's going to do all for you either. That's the most scary part of all for most folk. Oh, I might have to take responsibility myself. Yeah. That would be the only way, actually. Outside of divine intervention. And once again, getting back to the old idea of what's in people. Things that occultists have scoffed at for so long with the owl, the owl symbol. An owl can see in the darkness, you see. The darkness being society, the darkness that Carl Jung talked about naturally too, because he was a Rosicrucian and he was steeped in it. A lot of his insight was certainly interesting, no doubt about it. But his mother was an occultist too, and that's where he got it from. He learned from his mum. And trying to dissect the mind, coupled with the connection to spirits. That's why he and Freud split up, by the way. Freud literally was part of a political agenda, which it's the same agenda over and over and over of experts dominating and running the world. And the greatest way to do it is to tell you that you're not in control of your own mind, you're rather stupid and dumb. So let a professional genius do all for you. So they get the star-making machinery and they call him a genius, which he wasn't. And you start to quote him and parrot him. And he must be a genius. He's so famous. That's the criteria for being a genius today, So you got to go back further and further to get answers to it all. But Carl Jung, regardless of what they say about him, and he did do make a lot of blunders too, but he did split with Freud, because Carl Jung knew there's something beyond just this humanistic agenda, and Freud split up with that too. Freud said we must make sex the sole criteria for the motivation of the masses, libido, you see. And that's what they would use as a tool of destruction and then rebuild again. And we've been through all that, haven't we? Sexual revolutions and things. But Carl Jung did know from experience there was more to all this than just basically an atheistic, humanistic agenda, where man is a supreme being. No, he's not. He said that there's something else here, there's spirit, something spirit, and a connection to spirit. And so he had his dreams, his own dreams, to do with something outside of himself, something much bigger. And that's why he eventually said, too, in his last interview, in fact it was, he said that when he's asked, did he believe in a God of any kind, he says, I don't believe in it, I know there is a God. See, belief is a faith-based thing. Knowing is beyond just that. Big difference. But you couple that with the same, again, these eternal questions, where you have Paul in the Bible, in the New Testament, who refers to people who won't follow and who dismiss things just offhandedly. And you can relate it to the general population, where he talks about when you could give them little gems, that you may really, and again, philosophy, it's like the love of the conversation, you might say. But he says, there are creatures of instinct. He meant base creatures. They couldn't, like ants or mice, they're programmed. They're totally programmed. They don't have to be taught what to do to survive. They're just programmed, and they go through their life like the ones before them, generations before them, just never changing, you see. Why that is, I don't know. And I think most folk could be the same way, unless, again, that something spark gets lit in them for some reason. So these are very old questions, eternal questions. And I don't think there's been a country that could write and leave records of things that didn't go through this, that didn't question these same eternal things over and over and over. And as I've said before, there's way more to basic religion. Don't just toss it out the window. And don't judge them by the works of even modern day people who go off the rails at times too, in a society that's already sick in so many cultural ways. So where do you think they get ministers and priests from? And then you blame religion, you say. And would you rather have a humanistic society where they're deciding now, right now, it's in the open, who's going to live and who's going to die? That's what sustainability was all about too, by the way. With no divine intervention, even in the form of a person who represents a religion. That if it still had enough power, could definitely tell the bulk of their followers, which is a part of the masses, is like to stand up and say no. And the government's generally backed off. And that's why they hated religion. That is why they hated it, folks. Then they train the modern crew that have decided to demolish the people. They trained them in advance to hate religion, you see. So there's no one going to help you. That's how it works. This is massive warfare, well understood by military departments and unconventional warfare, as an example. And you're all victims of it, and you don't even know it. And you have been your whole lives. Everyone's alive today is really has gone through wars that didn't even know were going on. But it affected all of them in many ways, especially their thinking. And their opinions were all given to them. Even their arguments to fight over were given to them. They don't know that either. That's what they mean by the preparation for the century of change. Well, you're in the century of change now. That's what they called it in the last century. The one coming up was now. It's here. And in the Old Testament, you'd find that prophets were picked. And being a prophet wasn't something that people wanted, because it meant you'd never have a normal life ever again, or even time or leisure, and maybe even the peace that, say, family people would have and so on. And so they give you lots of examples of people being picked as prophets. And again, it wasn't something you would seek generally. Some people did, but a lot of them didn't. And so they give these comical little pictures of someone under their fig tree or in their vineyard or something, just enjoying a nice day, and then God would speak to them, and they say by name, and they give you the prophet. Who's that? He said, I'm God. Oh, really? Why are you speaking to me then? And God would tell them, you see, what he had to do for them. He wanted them to do for him, basically. And it wasn't like you were getting a choice, you were being told. And you would see the reaction of the prophets of woe and the whole thing, and the gnashing of teeth and anxiety, and because it literally meant that his life would never be his own anymore. And it's a good example of what can hit people. It doesn't mean you're a prophet, but it means if something's happened in you, if you really go on a search, a quest, the quest for answers. And again, most folk get lost, just like the internet too, same as the internet. And overwhelming data. Data is useless as data. It's selective pieces here and there where you can get something from, because it literally comes alive to you. If it doesn't come alive to you, then it's just put it back in the category of data. And don't fall for to be used by someone else. It's not that at all. You'll come to opinions for the first time for yourself. You'll get your own opinions by analysing facts and experiencing things perhaps that you didn't even imagine you could experience. Again, most folk go after the quest to get power, and that's the wrong thing to do. As I mentioned before, in Buddhism, there's levels in Buddhism where you'll start to see, they'll see things move around them. They'll see into realms that you didn't know existed, sort of thing, but there's names for them all. And most folk will get caught in this illusionary phase, which seems amazing. It's like an LSD trip to a lot of people. And powers and forces, etc., are there. And folk get trapped in it because they like it. They want the power that they see, and they want that ability to capture power and then use it and it's always for nefarious purpose. I don't care how you want that kind of power, you'll always use it for the wrong purposes. Because you're seeking it in the first place. You see? They say that the ones who go higher ignore that whole phase, don't get trapped by it. You ignore it completely, and then you pass on to the next phase at the much, much higher wisdom or learning. And that's one example from one people's or one religion's culture, an experience of getting to where they want to go. And then, of course, you get the other ones who are like Aldous Huxley, who was at a dead end. Yeah? For a good part of his life, he was at a dead end. And he and his brother, Julian Huxley, initially thought they were born, and rightfully so, into a scientific strata that was the helpers of the elite. They worked for the elite. So you had the dominant minority, then you have the group beneath them, the scientific type elite that would manage the affairs of humanity for the elite, including managing the masses of people. So they took that for granted because of their background and their family histories and so on. And the Darwin connection and all that kind of thing. And if you're into straight Darwinism, eventually, once again, it's never enough for most people. You would think, oh yeah, we just came out of some amoeba and electric currents and so on, and before you know it, all these little amoebas says, where are you going to be? I think I'll be a dinosaur to start with. How about you? I'm going to be a whale or something. I mean, this doesn't wash. It's a religion. It's a lot of faith to believe in it, you know. I'm not saying different things didn't exist before all of us. What I'm saying is the theory of why is generally the explanations of why that are made up by powerful groups, even today, same thing in different sciences. Not just in evolution. Evolution became the key that provided the ammunition for the dominant minority to do with the general population as they wished, by saying that the general population were inferior types who didn't evolve properly. And under eugenics and the Darwinian clubs galore that across the world, still have them today, that they believed that anybody who was through selective breeding that became wealthy and important in higher classes had achieved it all by the 20th, actually the 19th, but definitely the early 20th century, and that the rest of them were just the junk left behind, like junk genes, you know. That's what they call it today, in a sense, both in genetics, it's like junk genes. You're never going to get anywhere, it doesn't matter who you breed with, you see. That's what you've got today. You've got that strata there. But Aldous Huxley had his own crisis, naturally. He was human too. He had problems, and like, I won't give you a whole talk on that, but he looking for answers, and he couldn't submit to anything, you see, bigger than himself. Easily, put it that way, easily. And being of a scientific bent. And don't forget that he wrote Brave New World. I've mentioned last week, I think, about even movies that were putting the same thing across in kind of comedies. A few years before Brave New World came out, in fact. Eugenics was a big topic for many years before Aldous Huxley did Brave New World. It was all the rage, in fact, and they were training the public that you're either, if you're the lower classes, it's because you're junk genes, but you can't, no matter who you breed with now, you can't get any higher than you already are. It was fixed in your genes, you see. And that was getting promoted, and that's why, of course, Adolf Hitler incorporated that into his teachings. And he thanked Britain and the US because they most of the information he used, he said it was all done through experimentation and writings from Britain and in the States. You know, the Rockefeller Foundation is an example, and Cold Springs Harbor, New York. So don't blame Hitler for parroting what was being promoted in the West beforehand. And don't forget the West also was sterilizing what they called the unfit before Adolf got to power in Germany. It's amazing, the lies we have fed all the time on who to hate at any particular time, so that you could scapegoat this one person for the ills of the West, is astonishing. And including some people who became victims of all of that themselves, who were promoting it initially. So Aldous Huxley had gone through that whole massive phase of what to talk about and write about. He was well aware, because of the high-level meetings that he participated. He also knew about the Tavistock Institute. He was a regular member for visiting the Tavistock, and he was fascinated by the attempts of manipulating human behavior through, as he said himself, putting wires into parts of people's brains and stimulating parts of the brain. And he thought it was a fascinating thing to see folk being controlled electronically. The kind of stuff that Delgado, of course, eventually came out with. And they got videos up there somewhere they used to have on Delgado. It wasn't just bulls he was experimenting with remotely. It was obviously human beings who were doing that in Tavistock way back when Aldous Huxley used to visit there. But Aldous Huxley himself eventually pushed drugs. Again, being of a person who couldn't have much faith in something bigger than himself or the human intellect. He started using drugs, LSD. Many folk did, by the way, And it was even used as a treatment by some quack psychiatrists. They were giving it to Cary Grant as an example. He had about 100 odd doses of this thing at one point to try to rectify what they claimed was a defect in his personality. But anyway, and apart from using it on troops for experimentation too. But Aldous Huxley used it, and he came up with doors of perception. Because under LSD, you'll see all kinds of different things as different parts of the brain are stimulated. And that's where the whole 1960s thing came from, really, with LSD. The wonderfulness of everything. But without telling them, it was all artificially induced. And in a world that can lose its glamour, rather quickly, with financial depressions, poverty, illnesses, wars that they always give us, then it's an easy escape, a little pill. Rather than go and study or go off and meditate or whatever it happens to be, or at least people did in the past, you just take little pills and you get instant karma, as they call it, and they'd escape into different realms of reality, they thought. And they would see all kinds of distorted figures and beings, or giants and things, or monsters. But massive distortion of the perceptions, which will stick with them because it didn't happen normally. So such things and tremendous hallucinogenic experiences of light and colours. They said they could never ever find those colours again in real life. As your brain basically is all firing all over the place. So a lot of people got turned on, as they say, by that, and dropped out of society. And it was all done from the very top again. I used to give the talks on how the drugs were distributed to the universities by the CIA in the States, and had MI5 doing it, different forces within MI5, throwing it over walls of universities by the bagfuls to get them started, free. And again, a massive propaganda campaign, coupled with the culture industry and the Beatles especially, to get youngsters turned on. And, oh wow, the Beatles are doing it, now that we'll follow the Beatles from clean-cut guys into long-bearded characters playing the sitar. Well, now we should all jump on the bandwagon and go full tilt into hallucinogenic drugs. Hallucinogenic drugs, wow, isn't that wonderful? And we'll have all these experiences, and a lot of folk had bad trips and never recovered. Some folk, in their first attempt, had bad trips and never recovered. To get this drug-induced psychosis, they call it still today, And they had no idea that it was all arranged. I've said this, I can't run out of time, so I've said this and should always say it. As far back as Plato's writings, he tells you nothing comes from the grassroots and takes off and becomes a success unless it's created and authorized by the elite that owns it all. Nothing. Because you go into this realm which today the intelligence community, it's known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns, etc., etc. They go into all these different avenues. But they knew all that back in Plato's day. If you let one thing start, it's innocent enough, it might topple something down the road and have a domino effect that you didn't anticipate. And so they knew that by experience in ancient Greece, I should say, and Rome too eventually, that you couldn't allow it. So you had to nip it in the bud. And as say, most things were started by the top and allowed by the top. Right down to plays being shown to only elite members, like censor departments in ancient Greece, before they were shown to the public. And if there were some things to be added or detracted from it, they would do that, you see. It's the same thing happens today, only today they generally put more indoctrination in for change, planned change, than taking things out now. That the saving the public from bad habits and traits is gone. Right? In fact, bad habits and traits today now is the individual thinking for themselves. There's always a bad guy and a loner or something like that, you know. And that's how you're fed your indoctrinations. The people have no idea. It's an ancient system. I mean, so Aldous Huxley, as I say, went into doors of perception, and eventually he went into the Upanishads, and then eventually he went into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which actually, like the Egyptian one, is not Book of the Dead, it's really Book of Life, you know, and reality of how you get through into the eternal life. Eh? That's what it's supposed to be. And he died with that. He died with an LSD dose his wife gave him, or his own. And with that being read to him, she was reading that to him at the time. Which shows you different aspects of someone that obviously just basic hardline humanistic facts weren't enough for him either. Yeah? There had to be something else. Or he wouldn't be having his send-off to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's just one example. And it all points again back to what we're talking about. I think I'm talking about it is really the fact that what you're going through today and questions you'll ask today have been asked for thousands of years. You know. And again, a lot of folk decide not to know things. It's a conscious decision. I've lost count of people who said, well, I prefer, and I had a really, nice person tell me this. It was a bank manager and a manageress, and I just casually mentioned, have you read about the Canada's involvement, like the World Bank and their memos and their big meetings, and that every country had signed on to the, not bailouts for the next one, but bail-ins, where they can literally, the way it's all worded, they can actually take your savings, regardless of what you thought were insured levels, etc. And she never heard of it, And I did the talks on it from the government sources and from the IMF and the World Bank, who put all this stuff out at the time. And I said I could bring some in for you if your own interest's sake, since you're a bank manager, And she said, I prefer not to know. I choose not to know. It was too horrific, a thought of getting wiped out of your savings. And other folk, we mean the collapse. And I said, well, it'll be the collapse anyway, because regardless of what you think you're insured up to in a bank, as an example, which generally says 100,000, I think, per account. If the crash came at the same time, that's all finished. Forget that. Who's left to pay off that kind of insurance? If it was all real, eh? Because we know that money is a farce. In fact, I'll touch on it tonight too, where they actually admit they're making out of nothing. Of course, before all that, you're conspiracy theorists for just mentioning their own writings, eh? But that's what the world is. Again, you've got the people who, like Paul said, creatures of instinct, they don't want to know. There are ones that are just fearful and don't want to know. It's definitely a choice for sure. And but I think creatures of instinct, for most folk, they want to know all the things that they enjoy. They say who played baseball back in whatever year it was and won this whatever and what was the score. Or the soap operas and dramas and the lives of the rich and famous, etc. All that rubbish. And that's what it is rubbish. And that's what they choose to know. And as long as their masters are dishing out enough cash for them to have the little bits of fun, and they can go off and buy little presents for themselves every so often to have fun. It's all about having fun. Then they'll laugh at you for telling them what's coming down the pike. But these same people, remember this, when hell breaks loose, are the ones that will turn on you for mentioning it in the first place. I had, on again, their early shows, someone who voiced something that a lot of New Agers, it was as vogue. They don't realize the New Age movement is controlled from the top as well. They don't know that. Suddenly books came flooding the market, and all the bookstores suddenly had shelves of all New Age books, just like magic. Just magic for you. Boom, suddenly all there. With about a year, it was all there, replacing all other kinds of books and so on. Just poof. And they just took that for granted, like everything else is taken for granted. But this person said to me, don't you think that you can make things happen just by thinking about it? And this is what was pushed on the public at the time too. Don't be negative. Being aware of things is called negative, you see. Because that'll make it happen. It won't happen if you don't think about it. Okay. And it's a simple childish way of expressing it was taught to the public. Didn't think that nothing was real. And that's a good feat in itself, convincing the public that nothing is real. And understand it in different levels. Certain things aren't real, mainly your propaganda. But other things are definitely real. If you knock your head against the wall, you're going to have pain. That's real. Or if you wake up with a chronic medical condition you've had for years, that's real too. It's not there because you thought about it, you see. You thought about it because it's there. And that's a different thing altogether. But some folk, they were getting trained into, this is the same time they were going into the different dimensions. That was a big promotion from the top down, sci-fi authors and all that. And so, yeah, there could be different dimensions because more folk are thinking negative things about this particular area, and that's why it's happening, you see. Whereas the elite themselves would be quite happy if right now, and you actually see them using the techniques through psychological warfare, to turn on the people who are telling you the facts. They're enemies of the people, enemies of the state. That I mentioned, that's what all tyrants do when they take over in a tyrannical move. They immediately brand people who won't go along as enemies of the state. And they get the rest who are falling into it to back them up and turn on you. It's been done again. An old technique, eh? And the folk have no idea. The unreal part is how much do you really have come to believe in your reality that really was made for you. Really. You see, everything depends on you. And most folk just wait for somebody else to do everything for them. And they'll do what everybody else is doing. What have you done about that? Well, okay, I'll do that too then. Then the government says, well, 50% or 49% have accepted this mandate that we're putting across. And therefore they make it kind of voluntary. They always do it voluntary to start. Whatever it is voluntary to start with. To a certain percentage they claim will be hit. It doesn't mean it's true that they hit that percentage. Then they'll say, well, we're going to make it mandatory now. That's how it's always done. Driving licenses were the same, it was all voluntary. Driving insurance is the same, all voluntary. And that's going to come down to your back. That's how they'll start it, Or maybe not, because they're now putting a big fear psyop one. No exceptions. No exceptions. And that's meant to terrify everyone. It's intentional. It's to terrify you. It's total psychological warfare. The same military teams that the US and Britain and their countries and their alliances in NATO have been using across the world in the Middle East for years, in Asia, as it's come back to haunt you. I always said the Eaton machine would come back with its colour revolutions and its internal colour revolutions and its mandates with the same techniques, no exceptions. terrified about. They know how to hand. They've done it all. It's all been practiced already for years and years in other countries. Terror is a great weapon. It's the most basic one of all of any tyrant. Terror. Terrorize the public. And the public never really catch on until it's too late. And they've been terrorized and they've accepted whatever it is to be. And then, well, in previous regimes, they've been eliminated. The communist one was amazing how many people they eliminated in one generation. In the early years, they talk about 40-odd million people. But somehow communism apparently doesn't get the shtick that the Nazi Party got for what they did. And that's always been a bit of a point of confusion for some people. And Solzhenitsyn talked about it, others talked about it, and wrote about it using official guidelines and policy and statistics and so on. And also you had anything from 60 to 80 million eventually up until its fall in the Soviet bloc countries. You would think that would get more highlights, but we must never go back to that. Well, no. See, communism was the experimental phase for this phase, folks. It's technocracy, a society to be run by experts. That's why it was introduced. That's why it was intensely studied. And now you go into the super improved form of collectivism - communism - equality, where we'll all be equally poor in the level below the elite, and the elite's helpers. They always say you can't stop progress. I've heard, again, mainly scientists tell me that. You can't stop progress. But they get confused, I think, or a bit arrogant in their statements, because who defines what progress is? Have you, any of you, been asked your opinion or given a vote on what you decide you want or not for progress? It's all done for you. And the scientists will often say, well, if the invention's there, we've got to use it. Well, the atomic bomb's there, but are you making a habit of using it? No. But terror is the technique being used now. Utter terror. On the whole world, remember. This isn't... When I came out in the 90s, I was the first person to tell you that the Americans, who had lots of radio stations at the time, they at least looked at what was happening inside America. I said, this isn't just the US, this is international. It's an international body deciding everything, where the same things are implemented across the world at the same time, step by step by step, by global organizations, funded mainly by the taxpayers in the US, since they'd already exhausted the taxpayers in Britain through endless wars. The US took over. I used to be amazed too. I mean, I said, where do you think, where's the World Bank situated? And then, where is the Federal Reserve? It's in the US. The Federal Reserve, by the way, has really become the disher out of cash to the rest of the world's central banks. Where's the United Nations? It's in the US. And yet the US has been looking outside its borders to fight enemies outside of it since the end of World War II. But everything that's bringing the world into this system is based in the US. So then you have to reevaluate, what is the strange system you now have in the US? Because it's nothing like the government that you had, Even in World War One, although they'd already taken over in preparation for World War One, a system of the banking system based on the British system, with a central bank set up. The creature from Jekyll Island idea. In preparation, because then they could private consortiums of banks who can lend to the government on the condition that they can set up an internal revenue system, you see, and start taxing labour, the public, to pay off the debt which the government borrowed from these bankers. That's what it's for. Before I forget here, I ask people to send me donations or buy books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And how to do it, you'll find at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. List all my sites. My official sites are all on that site there. List them in case, because now that I'm telling you, one day you'll go in the comments, I won't be there. That's the next part of the phases of the agendas. They said they go after people who spoke out and who were not authorized to speak out. So you've got to be authorized by the mainstream. The people who were being ignored for the last 15 years because of the internet, all the mainstream characters, are all living, they were living on handouts by governments up until now, you see. Now they come back into their own, since they're the only ones authorized to toe the party line. They're mouthpieces of the state, which will tolerate no other gods before it. In other words, no other opinions. That's tyranny, folks. So, yeah, make a list of the sites there. I have, for rainy days to come, bad days to come, and hopefully if I go down, there'll be more sites I have to keep going, possibly if I'm allowed to even keep going. And you can support me by buying books and discs. As I say, you can send cash, personal checks. You can even use a bank order, which you can get cheap enough for small amounts, if you ask them. So I need MoneyGram too. I think it's still in use. So that'll help me tick along here, because, as I say, you can't do anything else when you do what I do, and it literally takes a toll on you, because it really does. Unless you've got massive teams behind you. That's what I've said before. Be very careful with the massive preparation for today, with all of the people who've been set up in advance for all the COVID idea, because you see, you're always giving your leaders, folks, always. And if I do get round to touching on warfare techniques tonight, then I'll touch on some of that too. You wouldn't believe what your governments and the military have been doing for years and years and years in certain types of warfare across the world, including literally flooding their own countries and training the talking heads for their countries. All flavors of them for different kinds of people. And you'll pick your leader. I like that person. You speak for me. You say the same thing. And then they lead you in the garden path and round in circles until you're totally inactivated, waiting for them to do all for you, whatever the change is. And things like that. And believe you me, as I've said before, you don't want to do what I do, because you can't have a normal life of any kind at all. You can't just receive visitors either, because you're burned out half the time, and you're still working as you're burned out. That's what happens, eh? Unless you're a front and you've got teams of folk behind you churning out videos and articles galore, etc., etc. And if you've got all that, then I'm suspicious. It's a sign of something else funding it. And I'm not wrong by these suspicions most of the time. But believe you me, if you were scouring the world every day for pertinent information that can be tied together to show a picture of something, it's morning till night, morning to night, every day. You won't have time for entertaining people that pop in. You really don't. And the place I live is like a workshop. Everything's in like the one floor, because that's all it's usable. and it's crammed, absolutely crammed. It's a complete workshop, of all kinds. And I'll tell you another thing too, before I just go off this little part. You wouldn't believe the train, I mentioned before, the trains since all this started are like every 20 minutes, day and night. And they're like 5 mile long, some of them. And they're going past my place at a clip of, like, say, 30 to 40 miles an hour. Doubled up, two rows, these big containers on them, every one of them. Miles and miles and miles. And they're hammering along. And it's got so bad. And I'm telling you, they're moving the food and supplies in some bases. Obviously, it's going to survive for years. This is to last for years. And I really mean that just by my own observations. I can see it. I really, this is a change. The whole way of living when you come out of this. It's not really to end, actually. Until you're in the new system, or whoever survives it goes into the new system. That's what it's meant to do. Because the supplies I can see flying by here, I never had that. Even in the good old days before the 2007 and 8 crash, nothing like this. I maybe get 6 a day, and nowhere near as long. This is day and night. So bad my house shakes. And the windows are actually, the framing are loosening off here. There are bits falling off the tops. I'm not kidding you, this has been happening this last little while. This tells me this is meant to last for years. And since it's meant to be the total destruction of what was the economy in order for sustainability and depopulation, then it's meant to last for years. It really is. This is the big one, where the rich men of the earth truly have declared war upon all the peoples of the planet. So you send a few bucks my way, and hopefully I can get through as long as I can get through, for who knows when or whenever. And I'll tick along because I'm in touch with so many folk across the world. And it's been a long, long journey indeed, of watching and observing and analysing and being in touch with so many people as we go through all of this. And physically it takes us, it burns you out, it takes years off you, no doubt about it. So you don't want to be under that little fig tree or in that vineyard, believe you me, when you're given the push. It's not healthy in any generation. It doesn't mean you're a prophet either. It just means that whatever it is sparks you off, whatever it is. And you get no rest, you see. But I've no doubt at all you're in the battle of the world, eh? It used to be said, when people used to talk in religion, more openly about religion, without fear of dogma. Because in religion too, you have factions that want power and then total power until they'll exclude all talk or inquiry. Anything that stops inquiry is not from a god or a deity, unless it's an evil one. Yeah. People did ask all the pertinent questions about living, It's a natural thing to do. You can all agree on something, that there's something bigger than all of you within a religion. And you can also agree that there's definitely, looking around you in your own world experience, there's an awful lot of evil here too, little evil. And psychiatry, as I've said before, can always come down and say, well, it's just psychopaths and sociopaths. As though that explains it all. It doesn't explain anything at all. It's a way of describing things. I've said before, like describing the signs and symptoms of someone who's perfectly possessed at times, or partially, or by minor entities or beings, or major ones. And that's a puzzle for people as to what camp to fall into. People want to fall into camps, you see. But I've said before, inquiry shouldn't make enemies of your fellows. Just inquiring into things. And unfortunately, Protestantism did jump on the bandwagon early of science. Almost be scientific, let's be rational, let's be scientific. And of course, there also so many Freemasons, the old brotherhood idea, were Protestant as well. I think some years ago I remember reading an article where it said a good portion of preachers in the Baptist church organization in the States were Freemasons, they were the largest number actually. So their pastors were Freemasons too. And Freemasons, under all the different guises of just it's a happy little club for guys, and they may be happy and all that, but the fact is too, it's an international brotherhood, but part of international with international goals, preaching things like the brotherhood of man. These are all flavors and shades of international communism. And then you went into Albert Pike's books and articles. They changed it to Bridge of Light eventually, or Bridge to Light, for modern Freemasonry. Because it literally is too intellectual, he said, Pike's book, Morals and Dogma. The people today can't follow it. They want short, simple sentences and things, not deep concepts of philosophies and religions. So they give them a bridge to light instead. But regardless, they were set up to be an international force of revolutionaries. And you can be a revolutionary on a minor scale too within your own society. Look around you today. And at a higher scale, at a national level, when you bring a country into revolution. Same kind of thing too. And so anyway, you're living through an amazing system that most folk don't even understand as they live through it. All they do is react to events and circumstances of the time you're living through. And that's the general bulk of the population, just reacting. The path of least resistance is what they always choose. They don't even know they're being coerced into making these little decisions. It's all done so slickly, you see. They just adapt and adapt and adapt. Again, it's this theory of, adapt or die, the Darwinian theory, you see. So they adapt and I should not have done that, but I had no choice really. It was just much easier to go this way and terrify the public. And then you get, H.L. Mencken, he was a columnist, not a communist, but a columnist that came out with little ditties, He was well known for it, but he says, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary, and the urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it. I'll say that again for the hard of thinking. The urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it. You see? And that's never changed. Terror and fear. Come to us, we'll save you. And you got to understand that tyrants, when they've closed ranks and swore an oath to each other and to this agenda for the greater good, using what they call the noble lie, because they never admit they're awful, evil people. You see, they're just giving you a noble lie to get you to conform to lower the population, and So they never come out and say, "Yeah, we're really evil." No. Psychopaths always rationalize to themselves why they're doing something. in order to rationalize it to the public. And that's where you are today with it all. So you're living through an agenda, a massive agenda. We've all been so studied even so long ago, haven't we? And it's an art today, believe me, it would actually teach at universities how to manipulate populations using anthropologists in their studies to go over the weaknesses in the systems of peoples and how to manipulate them. Tragic, really. We never had peace, We just don't get peace. They don't allow you to have peace. Because, again, if you get peace, you might start to think, well, you don't want to budge from being fairly content. No matter what level of society you're at, you might be fairly content, And you don't want to budge. So when they want to cut back, or you can't get that, or you're going to cut off your money, or lower your money, or make it worthless, you might get ticked off, you see. So the idea is to keep you always in suspense and in fear and in rapid change. And rapid change, they can increase rapid change as you adapt to rapid change. It's a trick, you see. But if the cow is in the field, he's been there for a few months and he's enjoying himself, it's a nice sunny day, he doesn't want to move, Well, that's an analogy for the humans, of course. That's how we're managed. Such vast quantities of your tax money go to professionals who manipulate you. Teams and teams of them. And you've got all the different foundations with their huge think tanks of professionals and staff. Each think tank can have thousands, like a civil service bureaucracy working for them. Different aspects of managing all of us. But the person at the bottom, you think you go if when you had work to go to, you leave your home and go to work and come back and have a few beers and sit and watch TV and just watch silly, inane nonsense, very immature nonsense generally, which is what you wanted after a rotten day. You don't want anything that serious. Just silly and stupid, and hopefully not packed with PC updates, And that's what folk would do, but they thought that was reality, you see. And it didn't dawn on them that they were being trained to do that and encouraged to do that, which kept them out of participating in anything else that was going on. And so the Protestant churches adapted the idea that science was supreme, step by step, until they became, for most of them anyway. And again, they don't have that central command, centralization of command, I should say, from the Catholic Church, even though that's getting hammered too. And yet they'd already fragmented off into literally hundreds and hundreds of splinter groups in Protestantism, which is, and again, it's a fantastic study to go look into it. And the studies have been done on them by behaviorists and sociologists and so on. Quite fascinating to see. It's the same pattern you'll find in Protestantism over and over, where fractions at the bottom generally or emerge within the group who are dissatisfied at the way of the world affecting their group, and seeing that their own leaders and congregation are falling into the trap of being more liberal with their interpretation of what it meant, and so they go off and create their own splinter, their own group. You see, a variation of the first one or the previous one, and they go the same way until their children would start to say, "Wait a minute here, our parents are getting more worldly here and doing the things they're not supposed to be doing, the ways of the world," and then they'll splinter off, and that's how it happens. It happens in all groups, including Mennonites too. Well, they're all been studied by our masters, all of them. Tremendous in-depth studies of it, how it's done. Because what you study about one group, you can use on society in general, in fact, the different techniques to control them or manipulate them, or even force splinters to occur if you want to fragment society, divide and conquer. So again, Protestantism has that weak link in it. And in the States, Protestantism turned a lot of people off because of the wealth. It was mainly middle class thing eventually, It kind of became more materialistic. In fact, it copied more of the Old Testament more until it was becoming more and more materialistic in a sense. And this battle between Christianity and the Old Testament to do with wealth has never been, can't really ever be reconciled, I think. Excessive wealth, it can't be. I think, it doesn't mean that people who become wealthy become nasty or evil, but a lot of people do. They forget what they're there for, and comfort takes over, and they can't relate eventually, in fact, to people who are not from the same class eventually. That's a fact. I mean, you'll see that. That's why it helped fragment it in Britain too, much quicker, in fact. When religion became a tool of the state long ago, as it generally does, The Church of England is a good example. Don't forget, the Church of England was born out of revolution against the Catholic Church, but although it kept all the rights and so on of the Catholic Church, but they made the monarch of England the head of the church as opposed to the Pope. So naturally, for centuries afterwards, a lot of their writing and the praises in the Psalms were dedicated to praising the king and protecting the king or queen or whatever, etc. So it became a tool of the state too, and that's why it really perished to an extent. So many folk have fallen away from the Anglican Church, the English Church, and joined the Catholic Church again, hoping they would get some traditional values taught because the Anglican Church went the way of the world. But the Protestant groups in the States are something to behold, because I'm talking about the TV type evangelists that used to come on and they do their big Hollywood type extravaganzas with literally Hollywood light shows and everything and sound sets, all these professionals to put on a great extravaganza of entertainment in a sense. And they go up there and cure everybody with just touching them on the forehead. And then pass around 5-gallon bins to put all the money in around these massive audiences. And they couldn't fail because you had a generation that was trained or brought up with this kind of thing, think it was all real. And they did some very good exposés of Benny Hinn as an example in his shows. It's worth watching how the professional performances are put on with professional lighting, stage production, the audio that would fit, it would suit AC/DC. It was fantastic audio, and how it's all produced, and the money that's raked in is just. But then they did a follow-up from, I think, that one with Benny Hinn, and they talked to people before the show, then afterwards over the next few weeks to see if anybody had, and some of the folk had mortgaged their homes to give as a gift in order to have their son healed and things like that. Just horrible things were happening. Just travesty, and a mockery of something that's supposed to be so pure, Horrible. And there's a lot more of that in the States too, these massive TV ones that also don't work for the people inside the country, and get paid not to. Anyway, there's many stories to all this, but the thing is, religion at one time, at least, people could talk about it, and the Catholic Church as well. They were allowed to talk about things to do with that of the spirit without being soppy about it. Because that's what turned Protestants off. Don't talk like that, it's not scientific. But the Catholic Church didn't discourage people who would talk about their experiences of sensations of another worldliness around them that perhaps interacts with us and through people too. Catholic Church too didn't disapprove of having a visit by a real ghost, because they said, by tradition, if something came to you, it was for a purpose, and you would know why it came to you. So that was okay, that type of ghost, you see, as opposed to demonic entities and beings like that. And you find the same thing in Zoroastrianism, where they have a different idea. Again, the good, the bad, everything's dualistic. And where they, from again, even earlier traditions than Islam, had incorporated into the idea of these demonic kind of characters that could take human form. So again, you might see even possession, and they could never be dismissed, you see. And they'll give examples in history too, as we used to do, of tyrants that crop up. They could lead nations and continents to wars and things, And also those who, behind the scenes, can help promote it from outside those nations for other purposes too. What does run it all? What kind of people, real live human beings, as you would call them, human beings, could sit back and plan agendas that would get worlds fighting each other? Millions of people slaughtered in the fight, profit off it, and even write the history books to say and give different reasons why it all happened. I mean, this is how it's done,